Welcome back, everyone, to episode 2 of the CrossFit Games podcast. We'll be talking about day 2 of the 2021 NOBULL CrossFit Games. I'm your host for this episode, Chase Ingraham, and we have Dave Castro and Danielle Brandon back alongside with new and improved audio equipment, as we found out with the growing pains of starting a podcast. Dave, if you guys are watching on video, where did you took it off? Where'd it go?
Oh,
Are we playing a who's who?
I can't speak with it in my mouth.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best impression of Froning.
The old Rich Froning mouthpiece airwave. Although we're not sponsored by that yet, Dave. So don't start pushing that too soon. We gotta monetize those things with the podcast. So if you guys are watching this is episode 2. Episode 1 was dealing with day 1 of the CrossFit Games, and we are going to talk about the programming for day 2 of the CrossFit Games and any behind the scenes stories that we may come up with along the way. But I'm excited to get this done. Episode 2 was super fun. I got a lot of great feedback on that. And as we get into it, Dave, Danielle, thanks for making your schedules work. Danielle, I know you said you're flying back in town. What were you doing?
I was in Florida. So I was hanging out in Panama City.
Okay.
Just for a couple of days, hanging out on the beach and literally just on the beach all day. So
nice. That sounds like a well-deserved vacation.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Dave, in the off season, for you, the off season is probably a lot different than a lot of the athletes. You know, we've seen people on vacations. Danielle was in Florida. All these people, like, what really is your process once the games is done? And like, do you allow yourself any bit of an off season at this time, or are you already thinking about 2022?
Well, this year I'm thinking a lot about next year already, and specifically the games and things to do there or things we can do there. But pretty soon I'm going to have to switch focus and kind of step away from that and really focus on the Open and some of those stages that come first in the season, which are really fun and exciting to dive into. And recently I've put some thought into the Open, have some good ideas and some creative things to play around with. So can't say too much about that.
So you're already thinking about the Open.
Yeah.
Well, we know the date. So that's already like a massive improvement over the last 13 or 15 years is like a 6-month date ahead of time. Usually it's like, hey, next week's the Open. I'm like, oh crap, I should probably sign up. So I'm excited. It's as soon as they released that date, I immediately, like, my heart rate immediately elevated.
Oh,
I was
same.
like, I'm not ready to see that. It's not even the CrossFit Games yet, and you're already telling us when the Open starts. Well, to that, Dave, I think I know you always are when you're watching the events go down, you're already planning, like, right from 3, 2, 1, go. Once people start moving, I saw you post this your own personal after action report. And before we get into day 2, I kind of want to talk about is like, while you're watching the events, I'm sure you're watching the athletes, you're watching the judging, the flow of it, how it really unfolds with a group of athletes for the first time. Is kind of going through your head as you're watching these events unfold? Is it just in the moment, or you're already like, okay, fixing that for next year, that didn't turn out the way I wanted it to? Do you already, like, what's going through your head through each event as it unfolds?
Well, all of that's happening. Sometimes it's you're really, or I'm really pleased with what I'm seeing, and other times I'm like, damn, that was a miss. And the good thing is with day 2 here, we're gonna have plenty of those highs and lows to go over in terms of how the things played out. And so, like, when you think, if we just dived into event 5, how that played out, it was super straightforward. And as designed and as tested, it pretty much delivered what we were looking for, what I was looking for with that particular test, in terms of just, it really being a rope climb workout. The cheddar chunk, or whatever we call that item, really it wasn't supposed to be really heavy. It was just supposed to be kind of annoying and a third piece of it. So that one played out pretty much by design. Interestingly, it was programmed earlier on with the yoke. And so a really early version of this one had the yoke, and that cheddar chunk was in place of where, on that yoke workout, where the yoke was. And just by timing, and we'll get into that one too later, obviously, but the timing, this is going to sound funny when I say this, but the cheddar chunk was much faster than the yoke was in all versions of testing. So people were able to carry the cheddar chunk much further faster. Although at the end of it, people were also able to carry the yoke very far and very fast.
Yes, I can't wait to talk about that one will be a fun one to talk about. So event 5 specifically, if you guys didn't see what that was, 4 rope climbs at 20 feet, 500, 400 meter ski erg, and then a sandbag carry was about, I forgot the feet, like 42 feet, I think was per section out on the, North Park field, 4 rounds for time. Rope climbs, 20 feet. We haven't.
That rope actually isn't 20. It's a little less. It's probably closer to 16 and a half. We, because you got to take into consideration the pad. Yep, exactly. And the height of that rig. Going in, I was thinking it was closer to 20, but while we were there, we measured it, and it's not quite 20.
Yeah. Well, I feel like in most distances at the CrossFit Games, there's always an ish at the end. It's a mile-ish swim, a 550-ish yard sprint. So give a little leeway there. The one thing I did want to ask you about is, of all the events you had all weekend between men and women, every rep scheme was the same. The muscle-ups were the same. The cows and the bikes were the same. The pull-ups were the same. In this event in particular, this was the only event where you had 2 different distances between the men and the women, with the 500 meter and 400 meter. What was the purpose behind that?
Timing, keeping them, making them end in a similar. And on that note, the actual the 21:15.9 from the night before, from the first, no, actually it'll be from tonight. It'll be from this evening, that day. I went back and forth on that one too. Maybe thinking we had an 18, 15, 12 version tested, had some other versions tested to try to make them finish in a very similar time. And so the reason it was 400 instead of 500 for the female athletes on event 5 was to keep them more similar in completion of time. And I think we accomplished that. So Valner had an 11:49, and he was the fastest time. And Tia looks like she had an 12:19. And she was not the fastest time. 11:41. Laura Horvath was the fastest time. Yep.
There you go. Yeah. I thought, and Danielle, we'll get your thoughts on this event in a second, but this year it seemed like more than ever you had more athletes testing these events for longer and multiple times. And I think because of that, it really did seem like the top times between the men and the women, maybe not like the full field, like with cuts and things or time caps, were very similar across all the events. Did you feel like that was a product of your testing of the events going in? It made everything so close together between the men and the women?
Are you asking Danielle? I don't understand your question.
Yeah, I know Danielle wasn't testing these events beforehand.
Yeah. So definitely this year we've tested way more than the year before, and the year before we had tested way more than the year prior. So we're getting more prepared and testing more and continually test, and we'll test them more because it only prepares us. Look, especially with this day, you'll see later, like we really pushed the envelope on with timing and with these tests and with these number of tests, and especially with certain time caps or certain events. So you really can't get away with not having done these or test these multiple times. And truthfully, even once we get there and at the actual venue. So really, what the tests are rehearsals to make sure it's performing the way it needs to perform. So on game day, there's not any surprises.
Yeah. Danielle, for you coming into event 5, you had your, long grueling day 1, you got a rest day, and then you come into this. How did you approach this one, knowing what the crux of the workout usually, it really seemed like the rope climb screamed off the page when you look at the event. Was that the same feel for you?
Yeah, especially as Dave talks about programming for the workout, just wanting to make the sandbag more annoying. That's exactly what it was. Because, when we practice this workout, we practice it with a way heavier sandbag and longer because you know, when there's a sandbag in there, you're like, okay, it's going to be heavy. We're at the games. So when it was only 42 feet and not even 150, right? It was like
right about
100 pounds.
Yeah, about 150.
Yeah. It was 150?
Yeah, it was 150.
Oh, okay.
Just
Well,
getting too strong. Yeah. Just like, oh, it's
seemed lighter. But yeah, it was more just a rope climb workout for sure. And watching the guys go first, you could really tell that you could just attack it really because the sandbag was nothing.
Yeah,
so it was like a couplet.
the mock Husafel stone seemed more just like a really heavy chess piece to move to determine what round the athletes were on. Dave, after watching it unfold, would you have wanted that piece of it to remain like it was, or maybe have it have more of an impact on the event after watching it?
No, I think it was fine because also like one of the things I try to balance in creation of these events and in creation of the tests in big picture is like everything it is the games, right? And I think everyone does think, okay, because it's the games, it's going to be heavy. And so like that's not always the answer. And I have to really balance that like every test. And arguably, I saw some people argue that a lot of these tests were heavy. There was also a lot that were not, and that's very much by design. So I look at, as we're creating the weekend, how many are heavy, how many are heavier, how many are moderate, and how many are light. And so, yeah, of course, this could be a different event where that bag was more of a limiting factor or more of a challenge. But that, in my eyes, with what I was creating for that weekend, would have taken that test in the wrong direction.
Okay.
But
I thought it was well balanced.
But a heavier version would be cool. It would be in the right if something else was then like brought back in or not as heavy. If something else was not as heavy, but I always look closely at that, not to make everything just favoring the strength athletes.
I actually liked the weight. I think that was an appropriate weight. What would you think about, and some people are like, oh, you always need to go heavier because it's the CrossFit Games or whatever. But like, what about instead of heavy, instead of one section, it was maybe two. So you just made the carry a little bit longer.
Well, yes,
is that on the table?
Great. I really wanted this one to be 4 rounds. And so because of the 4 sections of field, a 2-round version of that with, call it like 8 rope climbs and maybe 1,000 skier and 42 feet, maybe could have been something that we looked at. But if we would have made each of those sections just the longer distance and then called it 4 rounds, you end up having a lot of back and forth, and the visual would be less intuitive.
Okay. And that's always the challenge. I think a lot of people don't understand with the programming is that, and you had to evolve like this from back in 2007, Dave, is that, look, the test is the most important part, finding the fittest man and woman on earth and team, right? But you also put the entertainment value of being able to see the event unfold on the competition floor as part of the program. And I don't think people really understand how much that can affect the way you set things up. So I thought it was cool visually. I thought it was a great.
Yeah, everything's set up with that and with the visual in mind for sure. And that's why like very much programming is you have to understand where you're doing the event. You never program an event and then put it into a format. You have to look at the field of play and what you have. And from that, then you create and program around.
How much do you look at? So this year we had 2 venues, one off site, but between the Coliseum and North Park, do you separate like how many you exactly want to do in the Coliseum or how many do in the North Park as you're building the programming for that year?
It's more, I kind of look at like starting the day out there, doing X number, and then taking it inside. And pretty much the number we do inside depends on where we are in the weekend. Like this weekend, we got to 15 events, kind of because I really wanted to do that because it was the 15th games. Other years, we've only had 12 or 13 events. And so it depends on how many events we're trying to have for the whole weekend. And how many, like there's some premier events that are going to happen inside, like so when we did the clean 2 years ago at the games, for the next year, which was last year, I programmed the snatch, which was going to be the exact same thing. But then as it flexed to aromas, I was like, all right, I'm going to save the snatch, pull the snatch out of aromas. And then once we come back here, we're going to do the snatch Saturday night, or actually, yeah, it was Saturday night under the lights, kind of like we did the clean.
I was going to ask you that because we talked to you last year about the program of 2020. You had talked about you had everything set for Madison.
Yep.
And so how many, and you don't have to answer this, but like how many events did you save from 2020 that you were excited to bring out here? Were there a handful or a couple? Or I mean, obviously the snatch you're saying is one of them.
That was that was probably the main save. I think a lot of other things that was planned for Madison 2020 was kind of able to be preserved or flexed to something that happened at the ranch. And obviously there were some ranch originals that were created because like the runs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think
you cannot recreate that hill.
Yeah. Atalanta in concept was going to be a Madison event. And then it was rethought to happen and it wasn't Atalanta at that moment. It was something didn't have a name. But did you notice we didn't have names for these workouts this year at the event?
I did, and I was talking with Bill about that when we were going through all the events. And we're like, usually we say, the sandbag sprint or the sled push pull, and then we're like, okay, I guess we're going to talk about IE9 today. It's like, was there a reason for that this year?
Yes, absolutely. I started going to all the semifinal events and I was listening to all these workout names and I was like, this is ridiculous. Everything had like a fancy, cool name. And I was like, hey, you know what? Like we created this monster of like people naming these workouts silly things. I'm like, no more. This year for the games, we're not gonna name a single event. Because what I was seeing at all the semifinal events with their silly event names. So yes, that's what happened.
Danielle, do you like the event names? Do you think we should bring that back, Danielle? I like the event names.
I think they're fun, but I don't know, for the games it's kind of cool because it makes it more intense. Like just events 1 through 15.
Event number 5.
Yep.
And you know what else?
All right,
too?
So that was.
Let me just say this, and then we'll move on from this. There's something about like the I don't want the event to be the premier star. Like the athletes are going to make what happens there the star. And so like if you even don't name it, it kind of gives this idea of like, all right, let's focus on the athletes and let them excel within the parameters of this event.
I like that. I think it's fair. And, you've said a lot is like, you have what you program, but the athletes often, and we'll see that a little bit later, is they'll really kind of define what that event really is at the end. But all right, so let's move to event 6 and 7. And, Dave, you're talking about earlier about a lot of chatter about some of these events, and these back-to-back ones, I think, had that in. So we'll talk event 6 first. And as it's written down, 5 rounds, 250-meter run, and then 1 clean anyway. Women start at 165, ended at 205, men at 245, and then ended at 315. And heat 1 of the men go. It was the men started first, right?
Yes.
And it looked like, 4 rounds for time and then touch the last bar to see if you don't get time capped. And I would just like, a lot of times I just want to be a fly on the wall just next to you while events unfold. And that was definitely one of the moments where I was like, I wonder what Dave's saying right now after heat 1 of the men went for 6. So what was going on there after you could probably see after about round 3 what was about to happen.
Yeah, it's like, fuck. I was like, our time cap for this is way too aggressive. And here's the thing. On this, we tested this 6 and 7 a lot. And we did, we had a lot of different data points. We had a lot of athletes go through. And every test of 6 was pretty fast and much faster times than the guys ended up getting on this one. The one thing I would say is, so once we saw that happening, and then some men did finish, so individual athletes did finish that, we made a call on the scene. All right, let's add a minute to the time cap for the women because they're not moving as quickly as we had set it up in testing. So that extra time will help more athletes on the female side finish it. Because so I look at the times, event 6 for the men, and 6 athletes finished it. There are times when we create time caps where that's the intent. Especially you'd see that a lot in regionals where there's workouts or events where only a handful of people can finish them. This test, this one definitely, that was not the intent. So yeah, that kind of sucked, and that was kind of a shitty thing to see go down. But interestingly, there was still enough people to finish it on the men's side, that there was clear winners, and there was a good time. There's a good tie break point that helped with scoring issues. And yeah, and still, with all that being said, for Medeiros and how he pulled that off, coming up to the bar, the 2 Canadian brothers, they're not brothers, but the 2 Canadians were in front of him, and he came up behind them, and they both missed their lift. He hit his lift and went through and hit the finish line. It kind of was one of the huge signature moments for him in that weekend.
Yeah, that was definitely a cool moment to watch Medeiros do that. Danielle, for you, after watching, when you're competing, and we say this a lot on the broadcast, how it's always beneficial to be in the later heats because you can kind of watch an event unfold. And you said about in event 5, watching the men. How much do you watch the men even and the earlier heats to kind of dictate how you're going to approach the event for yourself?
Yeah, it's definitely beneficial to be in the later heats, but in this one, it was especially beneficial to watch the men go, because when we watched like the men struggle with that 7-minute time cap, we definitely said, okay, this is going to be very fast. So it was no longer a like moderate to fast run. It was just a fast run.
Yeah.
Basically, after hearing that, especially with that first round, with the bars not being too heavy, but still pretty heavy, to where you almost needed to run fast to give yourself more time. Yeah, it was so beneficial to see the guys go. So
now, Dave, event 6 and event 7, they're similar, but they're still starkly different because, as Danielle was saying, is that the first event, we'll say event 6, was really meant to be a higher paced run with a lighter bar. Were you looking for that as the goal for event 6?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the event 6 was supposed to be more of a sprint. And even in testing, it was pretty much that. It was a sprint, and some people power cleaned them all. Not many. A couple of our testers did. Most ended up squat cleaning the last one. And then when you combine that with doing event 7 an hour later or whenever later, it was not a sprint. It was very different. You had to come at it with a very different strategy. So I want to say something on the time caps real quick. So on the men's side, it was a 6-minute time cap, and it was supposed to be a 6-minute time cap for the women too. But then after seeing the men go, that's only 5 of them finished under 6 minutes. We added a minute to the women's time cap, and looking at the times, if we would have kept it 6 minutes for the women, 2 women would have finished. And because we added the additional minute, 25 were able to finish. So 25 total finished. Only 2 were under the 6-minute time cap. And time caps are like that, though. That's the thing, and that's they're arbitrary. Meaning, like, they're not the reasons people don't finish. Oftentimes, like most of these events and tests with no time cap, every athlete would be able to finish, except some of the heavier ones. Like load is a limiting factor, but definitely on event 6 for the men, the time cap was what prevented a lot of people from finishing.
Were those the same weights you had the demo team use on the men's side?
Yeah.
Or were they heavier?
No.
Like, what was the biggest difference? Because I mean, like I said, you tested them a lot, and somehow it unfolded differently for the individual men.
Some of the layout across the floor and the back and forth wasn't as calculated as it needed to be.
Okay. Because I know Cole is strong, but he's that boy doesn't like to run fast.
Oh yeah, Cole. Yeah,
I know he's strong, but he doesn't like to run.
That's funny. All right, so then we move from 6, then we go to 7. We said 7's heavier, and you also made the run shorter. I can't remember previously, before we got the events or the demo team, was the run always shorter, or did you make that call going from 6 to 7 after watching it unfold? Because we had a little over an hour between events, so it wasn't exactly a back-to-back, so you had some time to adjust.
The time cap from 6 to 7, the 7 time cap was always longer. So it was a minute longer. And then based off of what we had done with 6, 7 was going to have a minute longer time cap than 6 did. And looking at that and playing that all out, I realized with the duration, with the length of the run, they still wouldn't finish it because it was going to slow down so much. Because of the run was going to not be a priority anymore, and hitting the lifts were going to be a priority. As 6 was going down, I was looking and I'm like, all right, if we keep the run the same, most athletes aren't going to finish it. So kind of huddled with some of the team, made a quick executive call. I think we could have kept adding time to the time cap, but that's an endless game. Like, at what point is that time cap right? Is it 2 minutes? Is it 3 minutes? Is it 4 minutes? So made the call to shorten the run a little. And I believed it'd still preserve the intended stimulus with those heavier weights, which the intended stimulus at that point, it wasn't the run on IE7. It was definitely the cleans. And I think that preserved it and helped us a lot with it playing out in a way that was still exciting and didn't compromise much.
Mm-hmm. Danielle, between 6 and 7, obviously, we were talking like, okay, now we got to sprint in event 6 and just handle these bars the best we can. What was that difference like going from 6 to 7? Because yes, you got a shorter run, but those bars got heavy quick.
Yeah. I think you did make the run shorter, and we learned that between the events.
Yes.
Which made it, which definitely was a big difference, because I think with the longer run, a lot of athletes were just, okay, I'm going to play the runs really slow just so I can lift these bars. So it was more, I think, the transition from lighter and then having that hour break and then having to hit a heavier bar. It was just a weird stimulus to have to come back and hit such significantly heavier weights after such a long rest period. I think that was an interesting factor that affected some people, because that last bar of the first round felt great, but then knowing you had to hit heavier after kind of a break and re-warming up, it didn't feel too great. It didn't feel great. But
Danielle, do you think if because in clean ladders we've had in the past, haven't had runs obviously, but having a round 2 weight starting heavier than the final of round 1 isn't new, but having that hour break, would you think you would have performed better if they were back to back, or did that hour really kind of throw you for a loop?
I think almost better. I think better.
I don't.
Yeah, because I don't know that you necessarily needed the break, because the run was fast, but it wasn't long enough to really exhaust you. And you would have, still been pretty warm going into the heavier bars. So I think the break made it that much different, I feel, for me.
Okay. Dave, how much was that part of your plan between events 6 and 7? Because yes, they were similar, but they're still 2 starkly different tests, even though they have
was a big
a
part
run and a clean.
Is that what you're asking? The break? Yeah. And that just having a big break in between the two was definitely part of it. But let's back up. Even in initial creation of it, there was a phase and there was a point where it was one scored event, and there was an advanced version where the top times advanced to the next one. So it kind of went through some evolution, but then settling on this place of like the two, having athletes go through both and then having them scored separately kind of develop especially when it came to the 15 for 15 concept, 15 scored events for the 15th games. Making those 2 scored events became an easier call.
Yeah. I think it made me really question if I was going to power or squat the first bar on event 7. It was crazy.
Yeah. Dave, I'd like to, there was a few people that had some criticism of event 6 and 7. Is like, these are the same events. This is, and usually I see that and I don't even pay attention to it. But I would love for you to address just how different these were and why, for those that really don't understand a programming side and a stimulus side between the two.
Well, I think one big piece that speaks to the difference in 6 and 7, if you just even look at Guillermo, how do you say his Guy? If you look
Majeros.
at Majeros, if you look at
Majeros.
His event 6, he finished 8th in event 6. And then you look at his event 7 and he won it. And it's like, yeah, 8th is almost 25% down the leaderboard. And the reason is because 8 was way more about gas and way more about sprinting, running and being strong and hitting the lifts and sprinting through it. And then 7 was obviously way more about being powerful, and speed was important, but you didn't need to redline the heart rate like you were in 6. And so that small example there, to me, speaks to the difference in the two. Had he took first in both of those in 6th and 7th, which he did not, I think that would kind of downplay that argument. But now you take that out, and they were very different. They were very different tests of similar elements. Obviously, one you had to be much stronger, and the first you had to really redline the run and hit the lifts and do that efficiently. Whereas in 7, you could run hard or not as hard, because what really mattered was just setting up and making the lift. And on that note, I mean,
Danielle, how do you feel about the difference?
Let's look at another athlete. You take a look at Haley Adams, who she finished all the bars on the first one, and then on the second one didn't get any of the bar. I don't think she got the first bar. And so that speaks again to the massive difference in the two.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then Danielle, you doing it yourself, did you feel like those were two really different tests?
For sure. I mean, the first one was more, and I'm like upper stronger, and the first one was definitely, for me, it felt more of like a sprint workout, like the running I really had to focus on. Whereas the second one, I could definitely just slow down and play my game on the cleans, which is exactly what I did. Every run was a little different, depending on how I felt after each bar and what I needed to do on the run. And I could do that. Whereas the first one, you can't do that, or you're already out because it was just so fast.
Yeah. And I think people that just see it on paper, who don't really understand what's going on, they see the same theme written down and people doing the quote same movements, and they just don't understand the difference of the two. And then one argument that was really funny to me was they're like, oh, well, they use, like, say, Tia. They're like, well, Tia won both. I was like, yeah, that's kind of the point, right? Like, I know Dave programmed 2 different styles, but like, if you're going to be the fittest person to ever walk the earth, then yeah, you should be able to do both.
So well-rounded.
That's not a good argument to have. So when people are like, oh, here's the plot and here's the athletes who are top 5 in both, I'm like, yeah, great. They checked all their boxes like they're supposed to.
Yeah, but Tia, she also won like 9 events that weekend, right? Something crazy. Yeah.
It's like, you can't really use that argument to try to prove your point. So I just wanted to debunk a few of those and educate some people.
To go back to that Guy example, though, and even if you look at his other performances, he typically isn't the fast CrossFitter, which was kind of what was required of 6, but he's really the power athlete, which was more highlighted in 7.
And well, for Guy's a very fast twitch guy, right?
Yeah.
He could do the 500-meter sprint. That only took 1 minute and 15 seconds. And he can, crush the snatch and do the heavy cleans because that didn't involve running. But like you said, in event 6, it was more running. And then we'll see later in event 10 that what definitely wasn't his powerhouse either. So it's a great example to show the difference between the two. So if you guys didn't really understand, there you go. There's the difference. Okay, so we go from that into a very niche event, which is a single modality test of gymnastics. Now, we did that on day one with monostructural with the sprint. So we had our single modality there. Now we're bringing in a single modality gymnastics test. And Dave, you in 2018, I believe, you brought out the most unique handstand walk obstacle course ever seen at the CrossFit Games. And in this, you're like, hey, let's just double that. But I like that you started with the parallettes because that was the ending one back in 2018, which threw everybody off. But you always challenge athletes, I feel like, every year with something new. And in 2018, it seemed like for the handstand walk, it was those parallettes. And you saw people in training do some version of that over the years. And what is it like seeing I would say, athletes evolve because of the way you've pushed them in years past?
Well, it's always crazy how far they take it. I mean, when you look at this year's event 8 and what like Danielle was able to do and Scott Panchik, like they were like running on their hands, and they really crushed that thing. We actually tested it. We tested that one a bunch too here in Aromas, and then once we got out to the venue, I was with all the test versions leading up to the event. I was kind of worried about the 5-minute time cap, meaning I thought it might not have been enough. And because a lot of our testers were finishing in 4 minutes or right around 5 minutes. And then to see like there was no issue with the time cap by a majority of the field. Let me see. I think, 25th place was 4:59 for the men. And obviously the fastest was 2:05. But to see how quickly, because I did consider at one point keeping it just one direction. If it was one direction, obviously for where these athletes are now, that would not have been appropriate. If it was one direction for a single modality test like this, that would have been way too short. I mean, she would have finished it in like less than 45 seconds.
40 seconds.
Yeah. So, and it was, last year there was the 100-yard that I didn't like when Garris did, where he kept coming down every 5 feet. Remember that? Or something really, really small segment.
5 yards.
Yeah. So I knew that the distance was okay. It was just a matter of how it was with the additional obstacles. It started off very different. That test was something else. That I can't speak to because that might kind of come back. But it did start as a very different event. It ended up here for a variety of reasons. I'm happy it ended up here. And as you pointed out, I really did like starting with it because if you're starting with the most challenging element, that also meant, more importantly, you were going to finish with the most challenging element.
Yeah. It's really cool to see how athletes take your challenges, and though they may struggle, like when the first time we saw pegboards, like people struggled greatly. Now the top athletes did well and did fine, but then the next year they've been practicing so much. Now it was no problem. Now it's just another event, a cool test to have. And you see that challenge that a lot of athletes take now.
With the pegboard, it was like 2 or 3 years of challenge and struggle. I felt like I felt like the next year people did not fix it still at that point. I think it took a few more years of like pegboard for people to really get that.
Like,
yeah.
They'll never program that again. Okay, well.
Yeah.
But you guys got to know better than that. As soon as he throws something out and people complain, he's gonna do it again and maybe do it even more than before. Now, Danielle, we didn't know this event until the details of it until early on or late in the competition. When this finally comes out, what's the first thing that pops to your head when this comes out?
Well, very excited. And I had never practiced on parallettes before.
What?
Yeah. So we have the janky handstand parallel.
Oh, like the 3 in a row with the hole in between.
Yeah. So we did the 2, but it was so different because you were more focusing on the gap between the ramp and then the parallel, and making sure you made those gaps. And there's no flexion or no bounce, which was a big thing that Carrie and Bethany talked about, that the parallettes were more, they gave a lot more than handstand parallettes, whatever. But I was excited. I just knew it was going to be fast, and also that short breaks may not be really an issue. I knew that I could maybe do it unbroken or go by feel, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference.
When you were doing it, did you just go purely on feel, or did you have like, okay, I'm gonna stop right here and then reset and go again? How did you navigate through that the whole time?
I trust myself and know myself so well on my hands that I think before I was like, I'm gonna do the first part unbroken, but if I need to, maybe take one quick break, which I think I did. I think I took one break right before it. No, did I do the first
I think you
part
took a break
unbroken?
right before the last section.
I did.
On the first,
the last
yeah.
Yes. Which was just by feel, just to be safe more than anything. I could have gone unbroken, but just in case, because this isn't it. I didn't practice anything like this, so I was like, I might die on the way back, so I'll take a quick break right here and be safe. And it was all by feel, though. There was really not much strategy.
Yeah, you just took all the analysis out of my sales. I'm like, Dave, everybody's been practicing since 2018 since you've done that, but except for Danielle Brandon, who won. So maybe not practicing is the way to go. Or
but you
Dave,
guys,
I want to ask you about the parallels.
Do a lot of handstand with your crew, though, right? I mean, you guys do a lot of that.
I would say maybe once a week, but when we do, it's probably, for me especially, I only do about 10 minutes.
That's all it takes.
I just don't need to. It's such a big strength. It's such a big strength that I should focus my energy elsewhere.
I wish deadlift training was the same. If I could just do deadlift 5 minutes
too.
a week.
Oh, I feel that.
A little bit better. Dave, those parallettes specifically, you see a lot of people making up their own. I don't see anybody that has those. Like, is that like a super secret, like custom Dave Castro parallette that nobody's allowed to buy and practice on?
No, I think people can buy them. I just think I think they're expensive. But they did design them for us.
Are they through a gymnastics?
They're through AAI. Okay. So that company, that gymnastics company, they're not, I don't know if they're used. I think, they're just low parallel bars essentially. But I don't think anyone buys them because they're so expensive. But we worked with those guys on getting them or exposing them to the community that year, whenever that was, a few years ago. And I really do cringe at all the substitutes I see people use out there. And I'm like, oh man, someone's going to fuck themselves up with some of these crazy ramps and the plywood ramps and the plywood stairs. The good news is the athletes are becoming
very when we set the parallels,
capable of bailing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we said. If we can do it on this, I'm like, if I can do it on these janky parallettes, I can do it on some nice wooden soft ones.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll see people's like wooden staircases and ramps. I'm like, can you just like slap some rubber on there or something? Like, can we make this less deadly to practice on these things? So before we get through event 8, Danielle, I want to talk to you about event 8 because you crushed it. All right. And so 2 things. One, it was, we always get wonderful feedback on the broadcast from people who are way more professional than we do, apparently. But there was a complaint. It's like, all you showed was Danielle Brandon and nobody else. And I was like, well, if they were good enough, we would have showed them. But the problem is that Danielle Brandon probably did the fastest handstand walk we've ever seen. And I didn't really know what else we were supposed to show to give you props there. But one of the things that people talked about a lot, and, you posted a picture about this, was you finished and you celebrated with a double barrel salute. And
love it.
There's some mixed emotions on there. I know I kind of went in my own circle about that. But for really is like, you, again, we said this in episode 1, is like, you were dealing with a lot of crap, the COVID regulations and the sequestering and all the other bullshit that you felt like you were tired of doing. And, you came out there and just absolutely dismantled this entire thing, apparently with no practice or training whatsoever. What was the, when you finished and you threw those up, was that just to the whole situation going on, and just your little F all
Yeah.
this, I'm still competing?
Yeah, exactly. I think people took it to me flipping Dave Castro off. They were like, yeah, give the middle fingers to Dave Castro, give it to CrossFit. And that was not my intention at all. Yeah, it was just the whole situation. I mean, being in the position that I was in, there was just so many highs and lows of, you know, my schedule and all the different things being thrown at me. And yeah, so it felt good to like dominate an event like that, kind of rubbing it in
Yeah.
the situation's face.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to give you a little platform to talk about it because,
Yeah.
people always make their own assumptions as to what was going on. But if
Yeah.
it was to Dave, you wouldn't be the first person to do that or the
Right.
last. I mean, you won up Fraser because he only gave Dave one and you gave him two. So
Right.
we'll say that was the real reason.
Yeah.
Everybody can get along behind that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. More people would enjoy that response, I'm sure.
Yes. Here's my favorite story of Danielle with handstand walks. Last year at the game, she was on the demo team, and we had her demonstrate the 100-yard walk. And she does it, and she comes down.
Yes.
She comes down at like 95 yards, and I remember walking up to her, and I'm like, "Hey, can you do the 100 yards?" Like I was disappointed, like I thought maybe. And she's like, "Yeah, I just went 95. Yeah, I could have done 5 more." She's like, "I just stopped at the wrong line." And I was like, all right, good
And
point.
I think it was because I was Saxon, Saxon, very soft spoken. I think I was like gonna run into a speaker or something, and he was like, I don't know, he was telling me to go, no, like wrong way or something, and so I was like, okay, I'm not trying to run into a speaker in front of everybody. So
yeah, I do remember that because I remember trying it on my own off to the side like earlier in that day, and it took me like 6.5 minutes. It was really embarrassing. And I went to Danielle,
after
like,
everybody
did your
left,
hands hurt from the turf? And she's like, no. I was like, oh, neither do mine. Maybe because I was
like,
on for
oh,
way longer. But
yeah.
all right, so that was event 8, and then I want to go to event 9, and I think I love this event a lot because for one, it's classic CrossFit as far as the rep scheme: 21, 15, 9, Echo Bike, Cals, and then power snatches was at 115 and 75, or sorry, 105 and 75. Dave, we talk a lot about anchor events you kind of know you're going to do, and then you work your way around them. Was this one of those anchor events for 2021?
Yeah, for sure. And this was one, poor Allison Scud, she probably did this like 8 or 9 times, 8 or 9 different variants of it.
Oh
And,
my
yeah.
gosh.
And so
Because she
like
had 3 middle fingers.
different rep schemes, different versions. Once I even told her, I was like, this was in testing back here. I was like, hey, I want you to do it again, but like, don't pace it, like red line. And I said, just go really hard on the bike. And she's such a
Oh
trooper
my
and fighter.
god.
She's like, okay. And she actually went really hard on the bike. And on that one, she had one of her worst times because she just plummeted off the cliff. But yeah, this was an anchor one for sure, and kind of a cornerstone of the programming, built programming around it, because it is classic CrossFit. It is just really, there's no strategy. There is a little strategy on the Echo bike, but it's just really just you got to go hard and you got to go fast.
I think we say classic CrossFit as a defining characteristic of the events. And Dave, I wanted your opinion on this because you'll hear this from athletes or spectators or fans, and they're like, "Oh, it's about time we're doing real CrossFit." Right? And I think I mean, right? And so, like, we mean classic CrossFit as an enduring term, not like a definitive property of what the event is. When you hear that, what you have an opportunity to talk about that or respond to it. Like, what is when you hear stuff like that? Do you feel it's just a total misunderstanding of the programming and CrossFit itself?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Especially when you look up to that point, even that morning, you look at event 5, that to me, regardless of what implements you're using, that's a classic CrossFit triplet. And then you look at event 4, regardless of your like or dislike for wall walks, that event is also classic CrossFit in structure, in dosing, in just what you get from it. It is classic CrossFit. So when I hear that, I always hear that at the wrong point, because I always look back and think, how many other, like, look at all the other CrossFit we've already had up until this point. Maybe it's just not classic in your eyes or in your uh, definition of what classic CrossFit is, but that doesn't necessarily mean yours is correct in this case.
Right.
So yes, I always laugh on
Yeah.
it.
And that's just one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always think it's funny. It's like, listen, what's more classic than just running and doing a heavy clean? Like, move fast, lift heavy. Like, we've heard that phrase before. It's a big part of what CrossFit's really all about. So it's just because you're good at this doesn't mean that now it's classic CrossFit. So I always find it funny to hear that, and I was always curious your opinion on that. Danielle, when this event gets announced, was there a much different reaction from event 8 reaction to event 9 reaction?
Oh yeah. I mean, you just know this one's gonna hurt.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And there's nothing you can do. I think Coach and I were trying to come up with a strategy, and I told him, I was like, I can't come up with a strategy on this one. I was like, because if I get out there and I start to die and go off strategy, it's not going to be good mentally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about, yeah, there's not much strategy. It's, you're going to get to the 15 on the bike, and that's where you survive,
Yeah. And I love that, as he was like, okay, how do we game this? Is like, there is no strategy. And the beauty of this really lied in the simplicity of it, right? It's biking, it's power snatches, it's all light, it's going to hurt. It's just going to hurt.
Yep.
It's not a product of who's stronger, who's faster, who's more conditioned, because it's a 21:15:9. And being an event 9, knowing we're cutting from here, it really put athletes on the hot seat to really show us what their resolve was to being there that weekend, whether it's to not get cut or make themselves in the top 10 or keep themselves on a podium position. And, Dave, I posed this question the other day, is that I feel like a lot of athletes train volume for the games. One, because they have to, right? It's a grueling 4 or 5 days of competition. It's part of the training. Like, the 16th event is the entirety of the weekend itself, right? But people tend to get too obsessed with doing so much, thinking that looks cool, or look how hard this event was, and look what I did on paper. And they really get away from the 21:15:9s, the event 9s that you had programmed in. I posed a question. Someone is like, okay, would you rather do Atalanta or event 9 from the 2021 CrossFit Games? And I feel like a lot of people would say Atalanta because they think it looks cool. They feel more accomplished. But really, that event 9, I think that's a secret thing that a lot of athletes shy away from too much these days. And you putting that in the CrossFit Games was super fun to watch for me, because I was like, I bet nobody really either knows what this is going to feel like, or they do and they don't want to go there.
Yeah, I think a lot of athletes do shy away from the super high intensity workouts that are shorter and lighter weight. Like, how many people are still playing around with Fran? You know what I mean? And stuff like that. That are, yeah, most people avoid it like the plague, and stuff like this. And I think, in our training, that you would not see that at 105. People would scale that up to, or not scale it up, program it at 135, more so just to slow it down. There's an argument that could have even been lighter, that could have been programmed, call it 95, 65, and that might have actually made it worse, because of you'd be able to push a little harder on the Echo bike. So yeah, that's a good reminder to still you still need to have that short end, high power output efforts in your training. I was really impressed with Chandler when I watched that go down. He was in the heat of 20, and I was really surprised at how well he did. He crushed it, and he won his heat. Fikowski could go on and have the fastest time, but for the men. But I was really impressed with Chandler's effort.
That was fun. It was really fun to watch. And what I liked about that, to me, it was like a classic level 1 callback as far as programming is concerned, because of the volume versus intensity argument is like, hey, how do you make Fran harder? And everyone raised their hand. It's like, you go heavier. I'm like, incorrect. You make it lighter and you tell them to go faster, because nobody wants to do that. For you watching that, Dave, knowing what's about to happen, knowing what's on the line, was that just one of those where you got to just sit back and enjoy what you just did to these athletes for 3 to 5 minutes?
I wasn't enjoying anything that day after 6 and 7. I was like, fuck, let's not fuck this one up too. So, no, that one was, it was, I could sit back and watch it and understand everything was going to work out all right, because we weren't pushing the envelope or testing the limits of that test. There was a time cap that was really big, and the format was actually. Let me back up for a second. So with that many echo bikes out there was a little like, oh shit, I hope nothing catastrophic happens
Oh,
across
yeah.
60 different echo bikes all across the floor. Um, Luckily, that didn't happen. So there was that when we have a test or an event like that requires a lot of equipment, or not equipment, but a lot of equipment with digital devices
Yeah.
on them. There's always some cause or some concern there. Which also, though, how many times, it's really cool. How many times did you see that one laid out like that? 3 rows of echo bikes and
Right.
3 sets of barbells. So it displayed the race in a super cool way.
All right.
When
Shout
I
out to
came
the
off
Rogue
the
Echo
floor,
Bike for.
yeah. Sponsors of the podcast, right? When I came off the floor after after the women went, I remember seeing Annie, and she was so happy that she took second, but so surprised. She was like, I consider myself like the best echo biker of the females. She's like, I can't believe I didn't win that. I can't believe I didn't win that. I'm like, well, Amanda was pretty good. And she was like, really, it was surprising to me. I like that attitude, though. I like that instead of like just being super happy that she was second, she was really like, fuck, I can't believe I didn't take that one.
Yeah. I think one thing for Annie, it was really cool to watch her evolve as the days went on, because first day you're like, okay, yep, mid pack Annie, she's just here. I was just like shocked that she was here, and what a way to come back from a kid. And then you're in the mix. And then at the end of day 2, you're like, oh, uh-oh. And Danielle, for we'll go through your event start to finish. Can you kind of walk us through, getting off the bike for 21, and then at what point in the 21 power snatches do you realize you're in trouble?
Oh, I just right away was like, even on the bike, I was like, this is going to go downhill so fast. At that point, it was like, just stay in your own lane and don't get caught up in what anyone else is doing, because you're only going to finish this as fast as you can right now. Like, like, I'm like, my body can only do so much right now. But yeah, even the way the layout was set out, um, that kind of played to your mental game even more, to get off the bike or to look to the side and maybe see everyone getting off or seeing everybody on the bars in front of you. The way it was set up was really cool. It had a lot of advantages and disadvantages, I think, mentally and just for the competition and what you could do visually, what you could see.
It was cool. A really cool visual setup. And I always like that, Dave, you do a great job at, the A-frame rigs for a 5-round pull-up, thruster workout or things like that. It's always cool to see that at the CrossFit Games. And I'm with you. Anytime even if I run a class and we're using 10 rowers, I'm like, God, I hope none of these break, because I don't know how we're going to run a class without that. So I do feel that stress for you. And I can't imagine having 60 bikes out there at the CrossFit Games on the main stage, the fear that has for you. All right. So that wraps up day 2. Now, Dave, you said 6 and 7 kind of threw you for a little bit of a frustration loop, but overall, how day 2 ended for you? What was your overall takeaway from day 2 after it ended?
Good. That put me in a negative headspace, but it was for a bit, and then it was time to just regroup and focus on we still have 2 more days to go. And everything moves so quickly there that you kind of have to just move past the lows and the highs. So ending it on event 9, which was also one of my favorite events going into this whole weekend. I felt like the Wednesday night and then the Friday night, both those events for me personally, getting them out of the way, they were both cornerstone events that meant a lot to the whole weekend. And so at that point, I was pretty happy and excited about the next day and excited about what was coming.
Oh yeah, there's some good stuff coming in the day 3, but Danielle, like I said, you crushed event 8. You let some frustrations out, yet still in a celebratory kind of way for yourself. And then event 9 was event 9. After one day, like day 1, you had a lot of stuff going on. You got your rest day. At the end of day 2, how did things start to feel for you physically and emotionally at the halfway point?
Obviously, I think emotionally it was a little bit different than a lot of the other athletes, just because I was going through a different type of frustrations, dealing with those outside of the events, and then trying not to carry those with me into the events. But after day 2, the events, I feel like I don't want to say all over the place in a negative way, but there was just so many different
variants.
So many different variants that it was kind of like okay, I was just glad that day was over with. I was like, this day's over with. There were so many just unknowns, with the run and clean. I had no idea how that would go. You had just a terrible 21:15.9 single modality. So I was glad that day was over with. I was looking forward to the upcoming days for sure.
I couldn't think of a better compliment, Dave, for a day 2 from Danielle.
That was a really challenging day. I mean, it was a really big day, and they didn't know a lot going into that day. So it was a nice day to get out of the way. It was a huge day to enter, and then it was a nice day to get through because you think they didn't know 6, 7. They didn't even know 8 was down and back. They knew 8 had handstand walk. 9 they didn't know.
Right.
So it was a massive lift for all involved: athletes, volunteers, judges, us.
It was good. It was a great day too. All right. Well, that does it for day 2 of the 2021 NOBULL CrossFit Games. Our second episode deals with this. Let us know what you guys thought about the day 2 events, because, we always love your feedback because it's always so positive and encouraging on social media. But drop a comment either way, because we'll listen to it and probably not think anything of it going forward. But episode 3 will be on day number 3, and episode 4 will be the final day of competition at the CrossFit Games. Dave Castro, Danielle Brandon, thank you guys so much. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.